She was a widow, a foreigner, an outsider in every way. She had no husband to protect her, no son to carry on her name, no homeland that would receive her, and no culture that saw her as valuable. In her world, a woman's worth was tied to her relationships, to the man she married, to the sons she bore, to the lineage she preserved. But Ruth had none of that. Her husband was dead. She had no children. She belonged to a people despised by Israel, the Moabites. To the Israelites, the Moabites were a living reminder of shame. They were born from the incestuous union of Lot and his daughter. They worshipped Chemosh, a brutal god of blood and sacrifice. To be a Moabite was to be seen as unclean, unworthy, and dangerous. To be a Moabite woman, even worse. She was born on the wrong side of the river, born into the wrong family, raised under the wrong gods. She was, by every cultural and spiritual standard, disqualified. When her husband died, along with her father-in-law and brother-in-law, Ruth's status dropped even lower. She became a symbol of sorrow, a foreign widow with no name, no voice, and no inheritance. She had no reason to be remembered, no reason to matter, but heaven remembered her. This is the story of Ruth, not just a tale of survival in ancient times, not just a love story between a man and a woman, but a story of unspeakable courage, of loyalty that crossed ethnic lines and religious boundaries, of a woman who clung not just to her mother-in-law, but to a foreign god she had come to trust in secret. It's the story of how a broken outsider stepped into the legacy of the chosen people, not by blood, not by law, but by faith. She left behind the only world she had ever known. Her land, her culture, her gods, all exchanged for a dusty road leading to an uncertain future. She followed a woman who had nothing left to give. Naomi had no sons, no wealth, no promises, just grief. And yet Ruth followed, not for what she could gain, but because of who she was becoming. A woman not bound by tribal lines, but freed by divine love. She crossed a border that wasn't just geographical, it was spiritual, cultural, eternal. She became part of the story no one expected her to be in, a Moabite widow who would become the great-grandmother of King David. And later, by God's design, a part of the very bloodline of Jesus Christ. Ruth the Moabite, a name meant to be forgotten, but instead, forever written into Scripture. A woman erased by men, but remembered by God. Before Israel had kings, it had chaos. This was the era of the Judges, a time not defined by crowns or laws, but by collapse. A cycle of rebellion and rescue that played on repeat for over 3 centuries. Israel had no central authority, no national army, no king to unify the tribes, and often no interest in obeying the God who had brought them out of Egypt. The Book of Judges sums it up with chilling simplicity. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. What followed was a downward spiral. Israel would sin, abandoning God for the idols of their neighbors. Their enemies would rise up and conquer them. Under oppression, they would cry out for mercy. God, rich in compassion, would raise up a judge, a deliverer. But once peace returned, the people would fall again. And then came the famine, not just war, not just political instability, but environmental collapse. The land that had once flowed with milk and honey turned dry and bitter. Even Bethlehem, the house of bread, and was empty. Hunger choked the land. Desperation spread. That's when Elimelech made a choice. Rather than suffer in a land of promise that felt abandoned by God, he left. With his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, he crossed into Moab, a land Israel had been told to avoid. To the Israelites, Moab wasn't just foreign, it was forbidden. The Moabites were born from scandal, descendants of Lot, through an incestuous act with his own daughter. They worshipped Chemosh, a cruel god who demanded child sacrifice. To live in Moab was to risk spiritual defilement, to walk among enemies. But famine makes enemies look like neighbors. When your children are starving, compromise begins to sound like wisdom. So Elimelech and his family settled in Moab. And almost immediately, the shadow of loss fell over them. First, Elimelech died. Then, both sons, Mahlon and Chilion, also died, leaving behind their Moabite wives, Orpah and Ruth. In a patriarchal world, the death of a husband was more than grief, it was erasure. A widow had no property rights, no income, no protection, no social standing. Naomi had lost everything: her home, her future, her name. And yet, the story did not end there. Word came from Bethlehem. The famine had lifted. There was bread again in the house of bread. So Naomi made a plan. Not a hopeful one, but a necessary one. She would return to the land of her people. She had no idea what waited for her. But she couldn't stay in Moab, not in the land of so much pain. She urged her daughters-in-law to stay behind, to return to their families, to marry again, to reclaim their lives. She gave them her blessing, tears in her eyes, but no illusions in her heart. Orpah did the reasonable thing. She wept. She kissed Naomi goodbye, and she returned home. No one blamed her, but Ruth didn't move. Instead, she made one of the boldest declarations in all of Scripture. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. These were not the words of sentiment. They were the words of covenant, of commitment, of total surrender. Ruth wasn't just pledging her loyalty to Naomi. She was abandoning everything she knew: her family, her religion, her security, her culture, her future. She was stepping into a land that didn't want her, among a people who saw her as a threat, with a God she had only just come to trust. She had no legal obligation, no logical reason, no hope of reward, and still she chose to stay. This was more than loyalty. This was a spiritual transformation, an act of faith so rare, so radical that it would echo for generations. Ruth, the Moabite widow, chose to follow Naomi not because the path was easy, but because she believed, somehow deeply, that the God of Israel was the one true God. This was the moment that changed everything. Not when Boaz met her, not when she gave birth to Obed, not even when her name was written in the genealogy of Jesus. The true turning point was here, on a dusty road between Moab and Bethlehem, when a forgotten foreigner spoke the language of eternal faith. Ruth crossed more than a border that day. She crossed into a new identity, into the people of God, into the unfolding plan of redemption. She crossed into destiny. The road back to Bethlehem was long, not just in miles, but in what it demanded. Ruth and Naomi walked that path not as pilgrims, but as widows, as outcasts, as women with no covering, no wealth, and no one left to protect them. They arrived not with a caravan, but with the silence of those who had lost everything. As they entered the town, whispers spread like wildfire. Could this be Naomi, the woman who left with so much, who had sons by her side, a husband at her arm? Now she stood thin, tired, worn by grief. Her face was aged by sorrow, her spirit crushed by loss. She didn't smile. She didn't offer greetings. She simply said, "Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. For the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Empty. That was how she saw herself. But Ruth was full of something Naomi couldn't see yet: resolve, loyalty, quiet courage. Ruth had given up everything, but she hadn't given up. The very next morning, without fanfare, without help, Ruth went to work. She asked Naomi for permission to go into the fields, to glean. This was not harvesting. This was not paid labor. Gleaning was the ancient Israelite welfare system. a provision in the law of Moses that allowed the poor, the foreigner, and the widow to collect scraps left behind by the harvesters. It was backbreaking. It was humiliating. And for a young foreign woman, it was dangerous. She would be surrounded by men she didn't know, among people who viewed her with suspicion, or worse, disgust. She had no protector, no name to shield her, no male relative to vouch for her. But still she stepped into the fields. Every bent knee to gather barley was an act of defiance against despair. Every handful of grain was evidence that she would not be erased. And then, someone noticed her. Boaz, a man of standing, a man of integrity, a man who was not just wealthy, but wise. He saw her among the workers and asked, "Who is that young woman?" The response came quickly. "She is the Moabite who returned with Naomi from Moab. She asked to glean, and has worked from morning until now." It was said plainly. No embellishment, no praise, just a label, the Moabite. But Boaz saw more. He approached her, kindly. He didn't speak down to her. He didn't mock her presence. He didn't question her past. Instead, he said, "Don't go to another field. Stay close to my servant girls. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And when you're thirsty, drink from the water jars my men have drawn." This wasn't normal. This was generosity, radical, undeserved. Ruth was stunned. "Why have I found favor in your eyes?" she asked. "That you would notice me, a foreigner. I've heard about you, how you left your father and mother, your homeland, and came to live with a people you did not know. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." In that field, something holy unfolded. A Moabite widow seen by an Israelite man, not as a problem, not as a threat, but as a woman of valor. Later, Boaz invited her to share a meal. She sat among the workers, a place usually not given to someone like her. And Boaz, a man of power, handed her food with his own hands, roasted grain, bread, vinegar for dipping. She ate until she was satisfied and had leftovers. Then Boaz quietly instructed his men, "Leave extra grain behind. Don't rebuke her. Let her gather freely." Ruth returned home with an abundance. Not just enough for the day, but enough to signal something deeper was happening. Naomi saw it immediately. She stared at the overflowing basket and asked the only question she could. "Where did you glean today? Who took notice of you?" And Ruth answered with a name that made Naomi's heart leap. His name was Boaz. In that moment, the bitterness in Naomi cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for hope to slip in. She whispered, "May he be blessed by the Lord, who has not stopped showing kindness to the living and the dead." Boaz was not just kind. He was a kinsman redeemer, a close relative with the legal right to restore their family name. What Naomi once saw as empty, God was beginning to fill. The harvest had only just begun, but so had redemption. As the days passed and the harvest neared its end, Naomi saw what Ruth could not yet see. She saw providence. She saw Boaz's favor, and she knew what it meant. According to ancient Israelite law, when a man died without children, his closest male relative had a responsibility to redeem the family line, to marry the widow, to preserve the name of the dead. It was called levirate redemption, a strange, even uncomfortable concept to modern ears. But in ancient Israel, it was protection. It was survival. It was justice. And Boaz was not just any relative. He was a redeemer, but not the closest. Still, Naomi had lived long enough to recognize divine opportunity. She leaned in close to Ruth, her voice calm, quiet, purposeful. "My daughter," she said, "shall I not seek rest for you so that it may be well with you?" Then she laid out a plan, one that would seem bold, almost reckless, but one born of deep trust in God's hand. That night, Boaz would be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. He would eat, drink, and sleep beside his grain pile, as landowners often did during harvest, to guard what they had worked so hard to gather. Naomi told Ruth to wash herself, to anoint her skin with oil, to put on her best garments. Not seductive clothing, but the clothes of someone stepping out of mourning, someone ready to start again. She told Ruth, "Go to the threshing floor. Wait until he finishes eating and drinking. Observe where he lies down. Then go. Uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." To modern ears, this may sound questionable, even scandalous. But in the cultural context of the time, it was a non-verbal request for redemption, a symbolic way to place oneself under a man's protection. Not seduction, but surrender. And Ruth, once again, said the same thing she always did. "I will do everything you say." That night, she walked into the darkness, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. She was not just walking into the threshing floor, she was stepping into the unknown. She found where Boaz lay. She waited. And when the time was right, she quietly uncovered his feet and lay down. She did not sleep. She waited. In the middle of the night, Boaz stirred. The cool breeze touched his legs. He sat up suddenly, startled, and saw a shadow at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. And in the softest voice, Ruth answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your garment over me, for you are a redeemer." It was more than a request. It was a proposal, a plea for justice, a declaration of trust. The word she used for garment is the same Hebrew word for wing. It was a direct echo of the blessing Boaz had spoken over her weeks earlier. "May you be richly rewarded by the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Now Ruth was saying, "You said God would shelter me under his wings. Will you be the one to extend them?" Boaz didn't recoil. He didn't take advantage. He didn't send her away in shame. He blessed her. "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter," he said. "You have shown kindness even greater than before, because you didn't run after younger men, whether rich or poor." Boaz didn't just see Ruth, he honored her. He saw her loyalty, her strength, her faith. She wasn't just a foreigner in his field, she was a woman of noble character. But Boaz was a righteous man. He would not cut corners. There was another man, one closer in relation, who had the first legal right to redeem Naomi's land, and Ruth. Boaz would go to him first. He would settle the matter the right way. "If he will redeem you, good," he said. "But if he does not, as surely as the Lord lives, I will." Before Ruth left, Boaz filled her shawl with 6 measures of barley, a silent but powerful gesture. Not only did he not send her away empty, he sent her back with a message for Naomi, for the future. When Ruth returned home, Naomi saw her and immediately knew. Something had shifted. Ruth told her everything, and Naomi smiled for the first time in a long time. She said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out how this will turn out, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." And she was right. At sunrise, the town of Bethlehem slowly began to stir. Shutters opened. Vendors prepared their stalls. Children ran down dusty streets. And Boaz walked to the city gate, the place where justice lived in ancient Israel. There were no courtrooms, no gavels, no robed judges, only the city gate. It was here that property was transferred, disputes were settled, contracts were witnessed, and destinies were decided. Boaz took his seat, and one by one 10 elders joined him. Then the other man, the one with the closer legal claim, passed by. Boaz called to him and said, "Come, friend, sit down." The man obliged, unaware of the moment's weight. In front of witnesses, Boaz laid out the situation. "Naomi, who has returned from the land of Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention. If you will redeem it, do so. If not, tell me, so I may know." The man responded quickly, "I will redeem it." A simple answer, a practical choice. Land meant more wealth, more crops, more legacy. But Boaz wasn't finished. He continued, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the name of the deceased with his inheritance." Suddenly, everything changed. Taking the land meant marrying Ruth, a Moabite, a foreigner. This was no longer a profitable transaction. This was a risk, a threat to his own estate, his bloodline, his standing. And so the man backed away. "I cannot redeem it," he said. "It might endanger my inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself." "I cannot do it." To seal the deal, he removed his sandal and gave it to Boaz, a symbolic act in ancient Israel to finalize agreements in public view. With that single gesture, Ruth was no longer an outsider. She was no longer a widow left to fend for herself. She was redeemed. Boaz turned to the elders and the gathered crowd and declared, "You are witnesses today that I have bought from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion. And I have taken Ruth the Moabite as my wife, to raise up the name of the dead through his inheritance, so that his name will not disappear among his people or from the town records." The elders responded with blessing. "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built the house of Israel. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah because of the offspring the Lord will give you by this young woman." Boaz and Ruth were married, not with fanfare, not with prestige, but with honor, with blessing, with purpose. And then, in the providence of God, Ruth conceived. She, who had once been childless and cast aside, now held life within her. And in time, she gave birth to a son. The women of Bethlehem gathered around Naomi, the woman who had once called herself Mara, bitter, and they said to her, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a redeemer. May his name be famous in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." They named the child Obed. And Naomi, once emptied by loss, now held legacy in her arms. She cradled the child. She rocked him gently. She became his nurse, his guardian, his joy. Her sorrow had not been erased, but it had been redeemed. And Obed grew. Obed became the father of Jesse. Jesse became the father of David. And David would become Israel's greatest king. But the story did not stop there. Generations later, from David's line, another child would be born in Bethlehem, a redeemer far greater than Boaz. Not just of land, not just of widows, but of the entire world. His name was Jesus. Ruth's story could have ended with Obed, a child in her arms, a grandmother smiling through tears, a family restored. But God was never writing just one story. And from David's royal line, centuries later, in that same little town of Bethlehem, a child was born, not in a palace but in a stable, not under the gaze of nobles, but under the watch of shepherds and angels. His name was Jesus, son of Mary, son of David, son of Ruth. In the Gospel of Matthew, a royal genealogy is written, from Abraham to Christ. And in that list, 5 women are named: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, Mary. They are not the names we expect. They are not the refined, the righteous, or the royalty of Israel. They are the broken, the outsiders, the misunderstood. Tamar, who disguised herself to secure justice. Rahab, a Canaanite prostitute who hid spies and saved her family. Bathsheba, entangled in a scandal that wasn't her fault. Mary, a teenage girl from Nazareth who bore the Son of God in scandal's shadow. And Ruth, the Moabite, the widow, the foreigner. She was never meant to be remembered, not by law, not by tradition, not by culture. but heaven wrote her name in gold, because redemption has always made room for the outsider, for the faithful, for the one who clings to hope when hope is gone. Even today, Ruth's story is not forgotten. Every year during the Jewish feast of Shavuot, the festival that remembers the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, the people of Israel read aloud the book of Ruth, because her life captures the very heart of God's covenant. Not just rules, but relationship. Not just law, but loving kindness. In Hebrew there is a word, chesed. It's hard to translate into English. It means steadfast love, mercy, loyalty, grace in motion. And Ruth embodies it completely. She left her people, clung to an old woman, trusted a foreign god, faced rejection, poverty, and danger, and still she remained faithful. Where others turned back, she pressed on. Where others protected themselves, she sacrificed. Where others feared disgrace, she found destiny. She became more than a daughter-in-law, more than a wife, more than a mother. She became a symbol, a shadow of the gospel itself. She was a Gentile, grafted into the family of Israel, a foreigner, welcomed by grace, a widow, redeemed by love, an outsider, chosen to carry the seed of a king. The same God who saw Ruth in the barley field sees the unseen today, the forgotten, the lonely, the overlooked. Her story is for every person who wonders if faithfulness matters, if loyalty is worth it, if loss can lead to life. It is, it does, it will. Ruth walked into history as a nobody, but walked into eternity as the mother of kings. She should have been forgotten, but instead, she was chosen to help change the world. If this story inspired you, reminded you of the power of devotion, or gave you hope in the middle of your own journey, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment below. What part of Ruth's story impacted you the most? Share this video with someone who feels unseen, uncertain, or unloved. Let them know that even in silence, God is still writing a story. Like this video if you believe redemption can come from the most unexpected places. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of faith, restoration, and the quiet strength that shapes eternity. Because Ruth's story isn't just ancient history, it's living proof that grace still finds us.